My guest today is one of the most successful artists in rock and progressive music today. He was the man behind the band Porcupine Tree and is now a successful solo artist. I'd like to welcome Steven Wilson. Hi, Steven. How are you?
I'm very good, Roy. How are you, sir?
I'm great, man. Pleasure to meet you. I'm a big fan, and I'm thrilled to get a chance to speak with you today. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. What can I tell you, sir?
So, listen, I want to start off just by talking about your overall career and how, you've been able to build something that has allowed you to take a lot of risks and experiment musically and get involved in all these different things. And when you were starting out, was this sort of the plan you had set in mind to get to this type of point, or did you ever fall into having to write a hit single and, that whole kind of rock star thing?
You don't need me to tell you the music industry as it is today bears very little resemblance to the music industry that I started out in.
Right.
And the music industry I started out in, which was in the early 90s, was still very much the traditional path is that you make some demos, you convince a record company to sign you, you put some records out, you tour, etc., etc. And that, obviously, that was a route I did go down. I began making music which was more from DJ culture. I was using electronic music and trip hop in this band called No Man that I had. And that was the first band that I ever got a record deal with. And so I thought that was going to be my ticket, Right. I thought, okay, No Man, we're signed now. We're doing this very kind of modern, contemporary, DJ culture-inspired pop music. This is going to be it. What I started around the same time, which was Porcupine Tree, which was just me in my bedroom having fun, making this kind of retro, psychedelic space rock tracks. I thought that was going to be just a sideline. Now, life has a history of surprising you, and of course what actually happened is that No Man didn't manage to get, to break through to the mainstream as we hoped, and Porcupine Tree was the thing that took off. So, I expected one thing to take off, and it was the other thing that took off, the thing I least expected to take off. And the lesson that taught me really was that do your own thing.
Right.
Be selfish, be self-indulgent, because actually that's what people want you to be. So that was a pretty important lesson to learn early on.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of taken us to where you are now with following up on the success of a great record, which was the Raven That Refused to Sing, and now you're coming up on the new album, Hand.Cannot.Erase, which comes out March 3rd here in the U.S. And I always like to ask, when you are getting ready for a release date, what is that for an artist like yourself leading up to that, and actually the day of the album coming out? How do you look at that day, and what does that take you through?
Well, to be honest, release date these days is fairly meaningless because it's simply the day that people can actually buy the CD from Amazon or buy in the store, whatever. Most people, I think, by the time the album is released, have already got it. Or at least they've heard it,
right.
Streaming, or they've seen videos, or they've heard previews, or of course they've managed to find the album's leaked, and they've managed to. So actually, the release date is not as significant as it was when I was buying records as a kid. Sure. I couldn't hear anything literally until the day the album was in the store, and I saved up my money to buy. So I think again that's changed since I started, and it isn't as meaningful as it was. What's more significant for me is the start of the tour, which starts that week later, starts on the 12th of March. Now that's going to be the really big day, because really until the first time I walk out in front of an audience to play a new show, I really don't know whether it's going to click or not. So that's a more important day in my mind.
Do you get more excited about the touring part or the studio part these days?
I get excited about the whole process because to me it is like a cycle. It's almost like a season cycle. I spend however many months in the studio in complete isolation, writing and demoing the songs, and then I go into a second cycle, which is I work with my band, and so it's a little bit more communal and a bit more togetherness, and we work on the album together. And then I go to a third cycle, which is I start talking about the record and promoting it as I am now. So I'm meeting other people like yourself, like your good self, every day. And then finally, the fourth season is suddenly I'm presenting this music to hundreds of people every night, thousands of people every night. Right. And then I go right back to the beginning again, and I go right, from playing to thousands of people every night, I go right back to just me in my studio all on my own. And I like that I like that constant changing. I think if I was just doing one of those things all the time, it would start to, get a bit wearing. But I love the fact that I've been in the studio for the last year, and I love the fact I'm about to go on tour for the next year. That's what I like.
Very cool. The new album, how long did it take you to start it, following the last album? When did you decide to work on it, and was it the story that sort of triggered you starting an album, or were you in the process of looking for what to write?
I actually started writing new music halfway through the last tour because I wanted... The thing is, we do usually in an album cycle we do more than one tour of Europe, and usually more than one tour of America. So sometimes you're going back to the same cities that you were in only 6 months before. So I've always tried, and I've done this with my solo tours, and I used to do it with my bands too, always tried to have something new to play the second time around. So actually I started working on new music in the summer of 2013, during the break, if you like, between the two different halves of the Raven That Refused to Sing tour. So I was kind of forcing myself to come up with new music, and the story at that time, I think, was secondary. It was only when I came to start working on the album properly early last year that I started to coalesce all the sort of elements and ideas I had for the concept together.
Right. The story being about a lady named Joyce Carol Vincent, who was found after a few years being dead in her apartment, right? And
right.
When I was doing some research on it myself, one thing that was always on my mind was, how did no one notice with her needing to pay rent or the bills and all that kind of stuff? But what I read that was interesting, you tell me if that's true, is a lot of her stuff was on automatic payments, so no one really paid attention.
Yes, and I think this is where the whole crux of the matter for me is, because if you really want to disappear in the 21st century, I think it's a lot easier than you might imagine.
Yeah.
And particularly if you want to disappear, I think if you go and live in the heart of a major metropolitan city like London, it's actually remarkably easy to disappear if, as you say, your bills, payments are being taken care of, and you're not, keeping in touch with your friends and family. I think there's something particularly about living in the heart of a city that makes people almost paranoid about knowing too much about the people they live next door to. And I speak from experience. I lived in London for 20 years or so, and I very rarely got to know anything about the people that lived next door to me or in the same area as me. As soon as I moved out of the city, and I only moved about 20 miles north of London a few years ago, within a week I knew everyone in my street, I knew my postman, I knew my local policeman, and I think there's something about the city that almost encourages people to, kind of disconnect from the people around them, almost forcing themselves not to see, And so it didn't completely surprise me, this story, horrific though it was.
Yeah. One of the things that you've added as a sort of conceptual element to it is the blog, which is about the character in the album, and apparently the album has a lot of extra pieces of articles and things. So tell me about the whole sort of concept around not just the music, but everything that comes with it.
Well, for me, making music was always somehow connected in my mind to my three loves, which were, growing up, my three loves were music, of course, cinema, and literature. And I was kind of discovering all those three things simultaneously. And so for me, it was really a question of which one am I going to, pursue. And I pursued music, obviously, but cinema and writing and filmmaking were always things that, in a sense, were just as important to me. So you kind of see throughout most of my projects, certainly the solo album projects, there's always been an equal emphasis on presentation, packaging, artwork, writing when that's been applicable, as it is here and as it was on the Raven album, and also the visuals, the films, the artwork, the way the website is presented, the way the live show is presented. And I guess for me, that's because I'm more interested in being a multimedia artist rather than specifically a musician. And that's partly because of the stuff I grew up with. I grew up listening to conceptual rock music.
Right.
The packaging was important. The story was important. So that's really down to my roots, I guess.
The single, is it officially a single, Hand.Cannot.Erase? Is that the one that is sort of the lead track? I've seen that on iTunes.
No, not really. It's the song that the people that are looking after radio decided they wanted to go to radio with. But for example, there's a video going to be coming out this week, which is of a different song, and it's the song called Perfect Life.
Okay.
So the video that we're releasing this week will be for a different song. I think the notion of single doesn't really exist anymore anyway.
No, not
Certainly
really,
not. Yeah. No. And in my world, it's irrelevant anyway, because you take any piece out of an album like this, out of context, it doesn't really make much sense to me. It's conceived as a 65-minute musical continuum, so it's always a bit unfortunate when you have to present something out of context. But of course, I still hope that radio play will come, and so that was certainly the most obvious one to go to radio with.
Well, Perfect Life is actually one of the more, I guess, not mainstream songs on the album, right, with the sort of dialogue beforehand and everything. So that really follows in sort of the way you go with some singles, because even on the last album, I think the first video was the title track, and certainly not the common way most artists would go.
Well, yes, I mean, absolutely. I just really am not interested in that world, and there were times in my career when I was persuaded, and this comes back to your very first question, actually. There were times in my career when I was persuaded to do things I felt uncomfortable with, because I was told it was the way you were supposed to do things, So you go down a certain route, which is more to do with courting, the mainstream media, and I always felt very uncomfortable about that. And one of the things I've been able to do in my solo career is really just ignore all that bullshit and just do what kind of felt right instinctively. And Perfect Life was a very cinematic track. It was one I had a very strong idea in my mind for how it would look visually. And it's a beautiful, beautiful video. I hope you like it when you see it.
The other thing that is amazing with your solo projects, and continuing from the last album to this one, is the group of musicians you have with you, which are Guthrie and Marco. I mean, these are some of the best musicians in the world. So, does that make it easier to work on these types of things? I imagine they catch on to the music pretty quick, and it must be incredible to work with.
Well, I mean, I don't think it makes it easier to make music, because music is really about the writing. For me, that's the hard part, coming up with the material. But it's certainly more inspiring, to be able to work with world-class musicians. And I think if you're open, as I am, always open to ideas and contributions from those kind of people, then they can surprise you with stuff that wasn't what you planned, it wasn't what you expected, but it's fantastic. And it's nice to be, in a position where you can also be inspired and surprised by the music, even if you've been the writer of that music. So I think, one of the greatest gifts for me about my solo career is being able to work with these world-class musicians, to bring in different musicians, change. I mean, I have two different guitar players on this album. Guthrie is on about half the record. Dave Gregory is on a few tracks, and I play some myself. So that's something you couldn't do in a band context. You can't turn to your guitar player in the band and say, you know what, I don't want you on this track. You can't do that in a band.
Right.
So that whole kind of political issue doesn't apply in a solo project like this, which has been fantastic for me.
I wanted to, if we have a couple minutes left, just talk about the last album, The Raven, because that was such a great record and got so many awards and accolades, and was my favorite album of the year that year. When you were putting that album together, it sort of seemed to culminate in all the music that you had done in the past, at least for me. Did you realize how special it was, and were you surprised at all by the response?
Well, I wouldn't release an album unless I felt that way about it. So I think you can assume that I was very proud of it, but I'm proud of all my records. I wouldn't release them unless I was, So yes, I was very proud of it. What I was surprised by is how well that particular album was received, because actually it was quite a willfully uncommercial record to release, and it was the closest I'd come in my solo career to making a generic record. By that I mean it was very clearly in a particular genre, which is not something I like to do very often, but that was obviously very much a love letter to my love of early 70s progressive and progressive jazz music. And in that sense, I was surprised how much not only the people that already like that kind of music dug it, but also people that I didn't expect to really, to connect with that album also really got into it. And that did, I have to say, that did surprise me. I mean, it became my best-selling record, and I certainly didn't expect that.
In the U.S., your kind of music, generally speaking, by any artist doing this kind of music, has a hard time getting a mass audience. But somehow, even with Porcupine Tree and through your solo records, you've really been able to capture that fan base here. What do you attribute that to, and do you see differences in U.S. audiences versus the rest of the world? I think maybe the rest of the world seems more accepting to experimental music and rock music and stuff than it is sort of here in the States these days.
Yeah, I was talking about it earlier with my manager. The US does seem to be the most resistant to music that is not generic or that is not easily marketable to a mainstream audience. I really wonder why that is, because obviously historically speaking, America has really loved a lot of experimental music, particularly from Europe. To answer the first part of your question, I think the reason that my audience is relatively large is because it actually is not centered around a particular genre. So this comes back to my previous answer to it. If you come to one of my shows, you'll see guys wearing T-shirts of heavy metal bands, you'll see guys wearing Radiohead and Flaming Lips T-shirts, and you'll see guys wearing, Pink Floyd T-shirts. And I think that's the secret. I never said I played a particular kind of music.
Right.
And I've been resistant to being categorized, even though I, of course, can acknowledge that my music is in the tradition of the great conceptual rock bands. Of course it is. I'd be stupid to deny that. But at the same time, my music has got, as indeed we discussed with this album, has got pop songs, has got electronic music on it, has got death metal riffing on it, and has got long, more progressively orientated pieces too. And I've never said I play a particular genre of music. And I think that's the mistake that some people make, is they align themselves too much with the so-called progressive rock audience, which does have, a cutoff point. You can't reach, you can't reach a massive audience if you're just going to preach to those kind of people, as it were. So I've always sort of taken a much more sort of wider sort of view on my potential audience, and I've tried not to align myself with any particular genre. And I think that's one of the reasons why the audience is a bit more, diverse in that sense.
That makes sense. I just want to say that, like 15 years ago, I think it was the In Absentia tour that you did here in the States. I had never heard of Porcupine Tree, and someone suggested I check you guys out, and this was before iTunes, and I think I was able to find like one song somewhere, and it was The Sound of Muzak, which blew me away. And coincidentally, like a week later, you guys were playing in Tampa, so I went to the show, and it was at a small club. I don't know if you remember. That was my introduction. That was my introduction to the music, and I ended up buying everything that was at the merch table, and I've become a humongous fan ever since, and just thrilled to get a chance to speak with you after that. So I wish you all the success in the world with the album, Stephen, and I know everyone's going to love it. So good luck on the tour, and hopefully we can talk again soon, man.
Thanks very much. Nice to speak to you, man. Have a good night.
All right, man. Thanks. Thanks to Stephen for the interview. We're going to close with a track off the new album. This is the title track, Hand.Cannot.Erase. For more information and upcoming interviews, please check theprogreport.com. Don't forget to check out our Facebook page and Twitter, and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes.
Together we have this love. Even so, it's not enough. Bruised and burned, we won't lose heart. just because life gets hard. Writing lying emails to our friends back home. Feeling guilty if we sometimes wanna